Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of the Firefighting Female. I am Rhonda, and with me today is Dr. Meghan Quinn. She is a psychiatrist. Hello, Meghan.
Hey, Rhonda.
Hi. Aside from being a psychiatrist, I have to brag about you because you're like Wonder Woman.
God.
You are a lieutenant in the Navy.
Yes.
You are a firefighter. Master firefighter?
Lieutenant.
Lieutenant, okay. And you're a paramedic.
Mm-hmm.
And you know a lot about the topic of sleep.
I do.
And in every aspect of your life and my life, from just school, the firehouse, the military, just trying to get through the day, sleep is so important, and we lack sleep.
Absolutely.
And I don't think people realize just how much sleep affects every aspect of mental and physical health.
It's definitely something that plays a bigger role in all areas of our life than most people realize.
So I read that the average person should try to get 8 hours of sleep a night. Is that true?
It varies person to person. By the time you're an adult, the average is usually somewhere in the 7 to 9. So yeah, 8, pretty good. Some people need less. God bless them. Some people need way more. God help them.
I know. I remember just people that I know when they talk about their children in their teenage years, and these people will sleep for 12, 14 hours at a stretch. And I can't remember the last time I was able to do that, or if I could even do that, because we're so conditioned to sleep for an hour or two and then be woken up and may not go back to sleep again until the following night. And if there is a chance, and I'll use the firehouse because I don't have military experience, but, you know, if we're involved in just doing fun things, suddenly you forget the time has gone by and it's 1 a.m. and now you've really set yourself up for huge failure, because you could say, oh, it's 1, we've got to go to bed. We've got to get up at 6 to go to work and function the next day as either a person that goes to work as a parent or just in any aspect of life. And here you go to bed, and then what happens? Call goes out. And then you come back and you try again, and guess what happens? Call goes out. Or it might not be your call. It might be the person in the bunk next to you. Another problem with the firehouse is that where we are at Wheaton Rescue Squad, we have one gigantic bunk room. So if the ambulance goes, you hear that. If the squad goes, you hear that, the medic. So it's a no-win situation. But let's talk about what happens to us physically and mentally when we're deprived of sleep.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. There are two kind of competing drives that even lead to us either being asleep or being awake. I think most people have probably heard of the idea of the circadian rhythm, that natural pattern of kind of wakefulness. And that tends to be driven a lot by things that come from our external environment. So it's stimulated by exposure to sunlight. One of the problems we're having now is that all of our technology and all of our screens, that blue light is really good at mimicking sunlight and making our brains and our circadian rhythms kind of reset as if we're going through that early morning again. So that messes up that drive. So our circadian drive is going to be the lowest right before you fall asleep, because that is that drive for you to stay awake and stay active. Meanwhile, we also have a competing drive that is our sleep drive, or that kind of sleep debt that builds up over time. And eventually that gets to a high point where you can't do anything but fall asleep. It forces that. So those two things are constantly going back and forth, and that's what results in us naturally falling asleep when we need sleep and waking up when we're rested. But that's only in an ideal environment, and you and I both know that there are plenty of times where you need sleep and you're not getting any of it. So there's a huge number of areas of life where having insufficient sleep, whether or not it's technically the clinical diagnosis of insomnia or not, can impact you. It has impacts on your physical health. It has impacts on your mental health. It has impacts on your ability to do your job and do it well and be safe and be productive. It has impacts on our relationships. It truly is something that has a trickle down to every area of life. And it seems like it's something that's so easy that like a baby can do it. Anybody should be able to do it. It's just sleeping.
Right.
So when we talk about like the mental health impacts, and I think that's something that's becoming more and more prevalent, more well-known, more understood, there's really a strong bidirectional relationship between sleep and insomnia and depression. For some people, it's the insomnia that comes first, the lack of sleep, and that eventually leads to someone's mood being lower. There are other people who will be depressed because of something else that's going on in their life and will find that as a result of their depression, they're constantly fatigued. Maybe they're sleeping all the time. Maybe they can't get themselves to actually settle down and sleep at all, regardless of how tired they are.
Vicious cycle.
Absolutely. And it just keeps building because once your mental health is poor in one area, that can trickle down and impact all of these other areas of your life. One of the big areas of mental health that's always a huge concern for us, especially with first responders, suicide, PTSD. And there are very strong links between suicidality and PTSD, especially the development of PTSD in someone whose brain isn't getting adequate rest and adequate sleep. And if you think about it, all of our exposures to things that could be those potentially traumatizing events in the fire service, they're sandwiched by not enough sleep. There's never enough sleep.
Yeah, I never thought about that. That's interesting. And, you know, we also hear of a lot of substance abuse in the fire service. And part of that, too, I think, is driven by not sleeping enough, seeing things that are really bad and not being able to process them. It all combines together, and it's an outlet to release whatever is in the brain, whatever trauma is in the brain. And sometimes I think then when you hear people say, well, I'm going to drink so I can fall asleep, but you're not really sleeping then. And so it's interesting. I'm not 100% positive that I'm going to say this correctly about the circadian rhythm. But at a certain point in time, doesn't the body say, I've had enough of my awake cycle? So no matter what time your body shuts down, you can't really function when you get to that point where you're so tired. But in our industry, sorry for your luck. You can be as tired as you're going to be, but those tones go off and you've got to go out and perform. So we think about the different jobs that we do. You know, you could be the bull in the china shop firefighter. And while sleep is hugely important still, if you're pulling down a ceiling, hooking a ceiling on a fire, or opposed to a medic who's got to have fine skills to start a line, there's such a difference in performance. And there's also a difference in the way we speak to one another when we're exhausted, because you become very short and you snap at each other. And that's not your real personality. And also the focus that we have, our ability to comprehend things and to rationalize, goes out the door when we're exhausted. So it's just a horrible cycle when you think about it. And it's not one that we're ever going to really be able to resolve in the firehouse. Another thing that happens is, I think, not just when we're at the station, but what happens outside of the station too. So for example, and I use Montgomery County because that's a county that I'm familiar with, our career folk work 24 hours and then they're off for 48. But you're always in the mindset of fire because you work. When you're relieved, you're exhausted, typically. In all of our stations, we're busy. And you'll go home and maybe be able to take a nap, but guess what? You might have to go to another job, or you might be mom or dad, or you might have to take a sick relative to the doctors, whatever. You've got to be on. So you might come home exhausted. The next day, you're back to thinking, oh, great, and now I got to go back tomorrow and do it all over again. So that night, you go to sleep, maybe on time, maybe not, depends on what night it is. We were talking and we said it If it's football Sunday, you're going to want to watch the game so you can talk about the game at work, and you're setting yourself up for failure because you may have to get up really early to go to work. And so you've never really caught up. Are you able to catch up? For example, if you don't sleep for a whole shift, how long does it take to catch up on your sleep?
So there's a lot of different thoughts about this out there. People do recognize that there is some benefit in sleep banking. So saying, I know in advance I'm going to be short sleep over a certain period of time. So I'm going to intentionally give myself lots of opportunities to sleep and rest beforehand. Or similarly, I know I'm not going to get good sleep, so I'll make sure I have opportunities afterwards to catch up on sleep. But that's not quite the same as actually getting that good quality sleep in the moment. And the effects of having less sleep than you would ideally have end up compounding themselves. We were talking about this yesterday. There are some really crazy graphs out there that can actually show you that at a certain point, and we're talking like after a day or two of not getting enough sleep, you end up functioning cognitively at a level that's around the same as having a glass of alcohol, having a beer. You'd never be able, especially in this day and age, to go into the station, hop in the back of the squad, hop in the front seat of the ambulance and take off driving it after you'd had a glass of wine. But totally fine for you to go to work after getting 4 hours of sleep and be expected to do it. That's basically the same.
It's the same. Isn't that interesting? I'm putting that in perspective now. I'm thinking, wow, that's crazy.
It really is.
And we've been doing it for a very long time.
Exactly. It's become so normalized in this culture, but it's hard to come up with a good way to work around it. How do we end up working around a better, more healthy sleep schedule for firefighters? Some places have tried different schedule or shift patterns that 2 days, 2 nights, and then 4 off is one of those shift schedules that works in some places. But that's got the negative, the disadvantage of the fact that you end up then on rotating shifts constantly. So you're switching between days and nights. And we know that's also terrible for your sleep, even if it does say that you only have to be awake and functioning at work for 12 hours rather than 24.
Very true. Yeah, and I also focus on things that we do to try to get a few minutes of extra sleep, which could be a nap when we're outside the stations. There are some stations, I believe, that allow naps, but what would be a quality amount of time for napping?
So the ideal is that you take a nap that is the same length as a REM cycle, because if you tend to wake up in the middle of a REM cycle, you're going to be more groggy initially, kind of more sleep hungover, sleep drunk. Though there is some research that's been done that has shown that any length of sleep, any amount of sleep is better than having none at all. So really the answer is sleep when you can. If you can get that nap, take it. Don't say, oh, well, we might get a call. I might get woken up in 5 minutes. I might not be able to get a full REM cycle in. Better to get those 5-10 minutes than to not get anything.
That makes sense. That reminds me of when we talk about nutrition and we say, a sip or a bite is better than nothing. But that brings me to a point of how we eat when we're tired. And when you brought up the analogy of driving with exhaustion is similar to driving after having a drink, it's the same type of thing where you're really tired and you're releasing cortisol. And the first thing that you do when you release a lot of cortisol is you want to grab for simple carbohydrates or something easy because you're not going to think, well, let me go ahead and make a healthy meal. Who's going to do that? The first thing you're doing is going to the candy machine, stopping by 7-Eleven or whatever convenient mart is where you work, and grabbing the chips, grabbing the soda, because what's the first thing we think? We need to eat, we need caffeine. Mm-hmm. And if you are a firefighter that lives maybe 2 hours, as we talked about, from your job, and you want to, your shift starts, shall we say, at 7 a.m., but you need to relieve the person before you at 6 a.m., and you want to have some time to get in and put your gear down and get yourself situated, So that takes you now into 5:45 a.m., but you have a 2-hour drive. But you give yourself 2.5 hours because you never know what you're going to run into. So you may be getting up at 2:30 in the morning, but you've gone to bed at 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night because you still want to have that day off and get in everything that you can possibly get in before you have to go to work for the next 24 hours. So what's the first thing you do? You come to the firehouse and you hit the coffee machine. So for caffeine, while it helps, it also can cause hindrance to us too. The recommended amount of caffeine for a person that does not have cardiac issues is 400 milligrams a day. So what does that look like? A cup of coffee, just a regular 8-12-ounce cup of coffee, is about 95 milligrams. So we're talking about 4 to 5 cups of coffee a day. Well, aside from coffee, we're now doing the energy drinks. Celsius, I believe, and I don't quote me on this, but it's something around 200 milligrams in a 12-ounce can, and then Celsius heat probably around 300. Those numbers may not be exactly accurate, but around there. So already in 1 or 2 drinks, you're there or exceeded it. So now what's going to happen? This is cardiovascular month. We'll talk about heart palpitations just for a second. So we're now causing increased problems, all related to sleep deprivation.
And there's 2 really interesting points to bring up that go along with that. One being caffeine can be a huge benefit, but it can also be a huge risk. Caffeine's really a double-edged sword when it comes to sleep and wakefulness. There are definitely times when it's tactical. The military especially talks about like tactical napping and tactical caffeination, where it's you want to time it so that you know I'm going to take this caffeine because I know I need to be particularly awake and functioning and on my game in the next period of time. But we also know, and you and I both from being in healthcare, we tell people don't drink caffeine after 2 o'clock in the afternoon because it's going to make it impossible for you to fall asleep. So it may be advantageous for you to have caffeine in the short term because it's going to help you be safer on that call. But the long term, you may not actually get a great night of sleep that night because of it. So we have to balance the caffeine against the sleep schedule and make sure that the 2 things there end up really balancing out. The other thing that I think is so interesting is we talk about wanting to squeeze every last minute that you can out of your day off. And regardless of the type of shift schedule that firefighters are on, there have actually been some studies that have been done, and they've shown that firefighters tend to get the least amount of sleep on average the night before a shift starts. Not the night where they're actually at the station, where they're sleeping in the bunk room with all of the bells and smells and noises and other people moving around. It is that night before because of so many of those cultural factors that go into the fire service. Showing up early to show up early, the commute, some of the economic and financial factors that contribute to where firefighters live relative to where they work. So then sleep becomes another factor that works into some of our like social and economic determinants of health and how we actually do and feel and live healthily.
So I think what we have to focus on is how to achieve the best quality of sleep we can outside of the firehouse. So some people, and it is so easy to say, well, just have a schedule, go to bed every night at 8 and get up every morning at 6. What's wrong with you? But I mean, really, because let's face it, you go home to a family. Most people don't go home to just a house. And if you have just your house, you usually have pets there too. And I know for myself, when my animals want to wake up, I'm getting up because I have a cat that climbs across my head. And until I get up, so be it. So I'm usually up 4 times a night. But just trying to set some sort of a realistic schedule where you want to get between 7 and 8 hours if you're one of those people that needs more sleep, or 7 to 9 hours. So try to figure out, hey, listen, okay, so maybe if I know I'm not going to be getting that in one, sleep session at night. Like we said, if you can bank sleep and maybe somehow get a 2-3 hour nap that afternoon before whatever evening activity you're going to do, and then try to at least get a few hours before you go to shift. I know for myself, the fear of not waking up to be somewhere on time, I'm literally up every hour looking at the clock. And I think having that type of sleep also can play on your mind too. And sometimes you'll have that night where you'll say, okay, well, it's now 10. I can still get 6 hours of sleep. But now you're nervous. Now the clock says it's 11, and you watch that clock slowly make it around till midnight when it's like, I can still get 4 hours, 3 hours. This is terrible. And you actually fall asleep, hard sleep, about 45 minutes before that alarm goes off, and you're thinking, this is ridiculous. We just set ourselves up for failure with that. So caffeine does have a half-life of approximately 5 hours. So that's why we have to make sure that when we stop drinking caffeine, we account for the half-life too. And people know themselves well. There are people that can drink caffeine right before going to bed, no problem. But there are other people that caffeine is going to keep them awake. So you have to know yourself and do what's best for yourself. And turn the TV off. Put the phone away. You don't have to have that phone on all night. And if you do have it near you, at least put it on silent so you're not hearing the thing dinging all night long. Because that's setting yourself up for failure. If you have a timer on the TV, set the timer on the TV. If you require a pitch black room, get blackout curtains. Make sure the dog goes out for a walk before you go to bed so that at least you have, that night of freedom. And for us too, go to the bathroom before you go to bed. There's nothing worse than going to the bathroom because you're too tired. I was like, I've got to pee. But I don't feel like getting up because it's cold or whatever. Go to the bathroom. Set yourself up for complete sleep success and have a good sleep environment. I think that's hugely important. So what else can we do?
So you've brought up a lot of really great points. Controlling that sleep environment that you have at home and being consistent about it is one of the biggest recommendations that you're going to hear from anyone in healthcare about how to try to improve the quality sleep that you get. When you have those nights where you're tossing and turning and it's the clock watching, shoot, I'm going to have to wake up, and so you're not falling asleep, it sounds counterintuitive, but get out of bed.
Yeah.
Because when you stay in bed and you're awake, you're training your body and your brain to associate being awake with being in bed. Depending on how you phrase it, the thing that we like to say in healthcare is that there are only 2 reasons that you should be in your bed.
Right.
Sleeping and
having fun.
other adult activities. So if you're just lying there awake, or if you're someone who sits in bed and reads or brings your computer to watch TV, find a nice chair, sit on the couch, do something else. When you're noticing that you're not falling asleep and you're in bed, get up and do something that is, first of all, not engaging with the screen. Please, no screens. That just makes everything worse and resets that kind of alertness and awakeness. Do something that's kind of boring. Intentionally try to bore yourself to sleep. Think about what lectures bored you to tears in grad school. Think about what sort of reading or work you might have, like some good old-fashioned printed out paper materials that you can sit down and read or write. Something in low light that's not going to be super stimulating, that literally will make you feel like, I am so bored, I'm putting myself to sleep. And that's when you go back to bed. You want to train your body to be asleep. And this is something that I've definitely tried to work on in my own home. And I've found that the more that I do this, and it's so painful to pull yourself out of bed when you are watching that clock and you know you only have 4 hours left or 3 hours left. But if I pull myself out and wait until I'm actually tired to go back to bed, I pass out as soon as I hit the bed. And that last bit of sleep that I get is really good quality sleep. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly important. Other things that we don't necessarily think about as much are like the room temperature. So you sleep much better in cooler rooms, and actually your body temperature dips, and that's one of the things that keys your body to go into kind of a sleep mode. If you think about hibernating,
right,
it's a mini hibernation. So people who talk about liking to sleep in a cool room, that makes sense. So think about how you can also set your sleep environment up for success. I love having the do not disturb and having all of those settings built into my phone. You've got to be on a very select list of people if your phone call is going to come through to me once it's at past 9 o'clock. And I try to be consistent about both a bedtime and a wake time. Even if you don't have anything to do, even if it's a Saturday, don't just lay in bed. Get up, sit on the couch, sit in a comfortable chair. Again, training your brain to not associate the bed with being awake or doing other things. And one of the things that kind of ties together really nicely with the fire service and sleep, the whole concept of close before you doze, much safer for house fires if that bedroom door is shut before you go to sleep. That's one other way that you can also protect your sleep environment. That's how you keep the kids or pets or other noises or activities that are going on inside the house from reaching your sleep space. It just makes it that much more protected for you.
That's a really good idea. I need to do that. So that's great for when you're off shift. When you're on shift, good luck to you, basically, because you know what? You may be at a slow station, but even then, as we know, you're always on alert because you don't know what the next call is going to be. You don't know how physically active you're going to have to be. So sometimes you don't allow your body to get into that full rest because sometimes it's even harder. I know one of our colleagues at the squad, I won't mention her name, said every time I'd fall sound asleep and I'd get jolted up when the tones would go off, whether it was my call or not, I'd feel nauseous. And she said, and it wouldn't go away. And she'd have to perform on house fires or extricate. And it was brutal for her. So she never really allowed herself to sleep. That's another thing, too. When you're at the firehouse, and I look at the different generations at the firehouse, at ours as a volunteer station, compared to like an all-night career station. I call them the kids, and they don't want to go to bed.
They don't sleep.
And I'm thinking, go to bed. Why aren't you going to bed?
I don't know why they don't. They don't have anything to do in the morning. It's just fun for them to be up until 3,
Right.
4, 5. It's like a badge of honor to say, oh, I didn't sleep last night. And it's not because they were running calls. It's because they
did it on purpose.
were doing whatever in the firehouse while all the grown-ups were asleep.
Right. And then we're thinking it's 9 o'clock and we've got to be at work tomorrow and get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and function. And, we're in the medical profession and still take care of people medically. And we've got to be alert. And we hope we can be alert by getting enough sleep that night. I hope our patients aren't listening. No.
So where it's important to just be able to recognize when you're tired and when you're impaired. And that is a form of being impaired. And that may be a sign where you need to take the sick day because you realize I didn't get enough sleep. I'm not safe to function.
Right. Yeah, we've all had that drive home where we're just absolutely mentally and physically drained and sleep deprived. And it's a scary ride home sometimes.
It is. And there are numbers that back that up. There's been some research done, specifically more on EMS providers, but in areas of Pittsburgh where they looked at different, more occupational health outcomes. But the numbers were really, really staggering in terms of things that happened for firefighters when they were sleep deprived. So we had 3.5 times higher rate of on-the-job injuries for people who are sleep deprived. And you just think about that, how you're not as careful.
Right.
You stumble, you skip a step, you do all these things. People take twice as many sick days when they're sleep deprived if you compare them to their colleagues who are adequately rested. Also have 2 times as many motor vehicle accidents. We know, especially for firefighters, that's a huge contributor to line of duty deaths are vehicle accidents and vehicle collisions. And then what's probably the scariest for our patients is you're 50% more likely to report an adverse medical event or an error if you're sleep deprived and you're still trying to perform. And we're not great at knowing when we're sleep deprived.
Right.
We often think we're doing way better than we actually are. Kind of like, Again, likening it to having a glass of wine. You think you're totally fine,
Right.
and maybe you're not.
Right.
Except in this situation, your buddy's lacking just as much sleep as you are, so who's going to call you on it?
Exactly. And I don't think we would say that to each other. You seem really tired. Well, we always seem really tired. So I don't think we would know each other if we were rested.
Exactly. It's the norm for us in
Right.
Firehouse.
And I think people don't also understand that it takes years, not minutes, it takes years off of your life by not sleeping. And I don't know the exact numbers, you may, but I do recall this from just hearing this from another discussion that I was at one of the fire conferences when they were saying that years of your life have been taken off by losing so much sleep.
Yeah, I don't have an exact number in front of me, but generally, poor sleep leads to increased heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, different increased rates of inflammation. We already know that cardiovascular mortality is the largest contributor to firefighter mortality. So that's a huge piece of it right there, in addition to the mortality effects that mental health can end up having on you.
Yeah, we make bad decisions when we're tired.
Yeah. The kind of overall wellness culture of the fire service, and that's definitely one of those big buzzwords and something that's becoming a bigger deal now. People are paying more attention to wellness in the fire service and just wellness in life in general. And there are definitely things that the fire service can do to try to promote sleep and better sleep hygiene. Is it appropriate to authorize a tactical nap? If you're on a really busy EMS unit, you can basically guarantee you're not going to sleep the night. Take a 2-hour nap in the afternoon. If you're not running something, why aren't you asleep? Why aren't you taking advantage of that time? We're seeing it more with different alerting systems and different bunker configurations as more new stations are built, that places are going to either individual single-person bunk rooms, so more of like the dorm room style where it's just one person, and then you select so you only hear the tones for the unit that you're on.
Right.
You also don't hear the CPAP of the person next to you and the dinging of the phone from the person 2 beds over whose partner's texting them throughout the night, and the alarm that somebody forgot to turn off on their phone that's going to go off every 5 minutes because they're out on a call. So it eliminates all of that additional background. Departments having a responsible culture around caffeine and other substance use. We didn't really talk about it much, but there are people who will use nicotine products rather than caffeine to promote wakefulness, and that's got a whole other can of worms when it comes to different health consequences and trickle-down effects. So it's looking at what the department promotes as how are ways that we can be awake and alert in a healthy way. One thing that we can consider, definitely not a popular thing to consider, but something that may be necessary, is how long is it appropriate to work? And do we need a mechanism for someone to say, I am too tired to safely finish this shift? I need to tap out because I think I am going to be dangerous. I think I am going to provide unsafe patient care. I'm not going to make good decisions. And 65% of the calls that we run in the fire service are EMS calls.
Right.
So we need to be able to function well as healthcare providers, what you and I do every day. But we need to be able to do that safely at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we need to have a mechanism in place where it's not looked down on for someone to say, hey, I need to tap out. I need somebody to come in. A lot of healthcare systems have something like that built into a call system or a call structure where if I'm the doc who's on call and I am too tired or too sick or too whatever and I can't go in and manage an issue, there is someone who's on deck right behind me who can step up in that emergency.
Yeah, because you look at truck drivers, pilots, bus drivers, they have to work a certain amount of time, then they have to stop.
Mm-hmm. Mandatory crew rest.
Right. But we go for a minimum of 24 hours on a career. Well, depends on what station you're at, but I'll use ours for example. But guess what? You can sign up for overtime the next day. So that's something that really needs to be looked at.
And if you think about it, having a 24-hour shift is standard for us, but there are parts of the country where a 48-hour shift is standard.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this in the squad yesterday in the kitchen, and one of the kids heard us talking about this, and just the look of horror that came over her face when we said a 48-hour shift, and she couldn't believe it. She was like, how is that legal? How is that safe?
Right.
And we should all be as horrified as that college student was with the idea of someone continuously providing around-the-clock medical care for 48 hours straight.
This is bringing up a lot of things in my mind. I'm going to have to do something about all this. I don't know how, but I'm going to do something about all of this. The moral of the story is, first responders out there, get your sleep. Put the phone down, turn the TV off, and use the bed for sleeping. And until next time, see ya!